I've always drawn to racial identity theory because it's an applied theory. I do believe that when we have a strong theory, and it's a theory that can take us places, that we ought to run with it. We ought to do something about it. There was a famous psychologist named Kenneth Clark. He and his wife Mamie Clark, Kenneth and Mamie Clark, were two black psychologists who were involved in the Brown versus Board of Education trial for desegregation. The decision was actually led to the desegregation of schools in the U.S. Well, Kenneth Clark was a psychologist. He was quoted as saying, "Why have a good theory if not to use it?" You know, and I remember reading that long time ago, and it just stuck with me. And I think that's the reason why. So in my own work with the theory, I like to examine dialogue or discourse. I can't help but do it, in fact, when I'm reading things and observing dialogue, and I'm also seeing how these dialogues, when it's relating to race or racism, there are many times qualities of dehumanization, even by those who I would say are probably not at all aware. And I'm not, thinking of an excuse for them. I think that when I've even come to people and said, "Do you realize you've said this?" and so forth, I think that in some cases there's a real sincere, "I didn't realize it." Not in all cases, but in some cases that is what's happened. But I think that we get socialized into language, and I think we often forget that the reproduction of racism occurs by everybody. So whether it's, we think of it often in terms of white and black, all kinds of configurations by racial groups, and it does happen, and whites definitely are, in terms of the culture or our society and racism, are the ones who have, wielded the violence for so long and so forth and carry that on. But it can get absorbed into a culture, and it has gotten absorbed into many cultures, including here in the U.S. And when we absorb it, many people who are the targets of racism, say blacks, for example, can absorb and then reproduce elements of it. We don't reproduce racism because that's a power element to it. And if blacks are, often as we are, not in powerful positions, it still does in dyads or in groups, even neighborhoods. If someone said, "Well, I'm from the Washington, D.C. area, and there are some neighborhoods there that are wealthy and black. We only want people like us," that kind of thing. There are many ways in which we make decisions about hierarchy that gets a sort of a spiraling off of this racism model, right? And with racial themes. So people can very easily say, "Oh, that's just human nature." No, there are racial themes, like skin color, for example, But the idea, though, is that when we understand and make sense of the things that are happening, and then we can take them and say, let's operate in a way that exposes what we're talking about. Let's be overt about it. And that's the first scary thing for many people, because we're often silenced in talking about it. We want to talk about ethnicity instead of race, and they're not the same thing. We find ways to avoid and to codify it, or even to talk about it, but it's not talked about in a way that even is aligned with people who study it, anthropologists and so forth. With regards to the psychological impacts of race and racism, we need to first have the ability, the courage to talk and to know the words. So in my classes and with this particular group, it becomes important that the words are used, that we are understanding and making use of words as clearly as we can. We are leaving open opportunities for the dialogue to occur. We are encouraging and reinforcing the kinds of dialogues that are moving people to greater flexibility in their thinking. This theory essentially is saying that when we're in these relationships, let's say in a counseling relationship, but I'll even be more specific, in our project right now, it's the idea that this is a relationship. These are relationships that we want to keep having again and again, and we want our girls, our young women, to understand that we're a part of them, they're a part of us, and we want to have these dialogues with them, the sense making, because we believe it's a part of healing. So my work is to look at and study, examine, and theorize about this application of theory. And I also practice that in different ways. I practice it when I teach, when I'm with my students. I practice it when I'm working on this project or any grassroots project. I want to be someone who can model the kinds of behaviors, hopefully. I'm not suggesting that I have it all figured out, but as a theorist, it's me who I'm constantly doing this ongoing examination of how people interact. And it relates to peace, because the title of my book is A Psychology of Liberation and Peace. The goal is towards liberation, of freedom, of a release of the structures and the strictures that bind us, that tell us that there are certain roles we play and certain places we ought to go and not go, or how we ought to be with people. Those are strictures that we can release ourselves from with understanding and practice. So the apply part, again with sense making, and the practice part, it means that it has to occur frequently. It has to occur constantly. It really can't occur not in a real meaningful way, fleetingly, especially if we have within a society everything that says that, to talk openly about race feels funny, it feels weird, it's making people feel uncomfortable and so forth. I've after teaching, for close to 30 years, I've heard that before, but I also have the objective in whatever group I'm in to help people to understand that this is an environment that if it's uncomfortable, it just means that it's new, it's scary, but we're going to get through it. And that's the relationship part of it. We're going to get through because there's caring, there's a humanness to all of this. We are all human. I want people to see each other as they would see themselves. And the thing that's often talked about, the uncomfortableness or the difficult situations and so forth, they're the kinds of things that occur, but in the right environments, especially with people who can facilitate and have the caring and who can help make sense of it, who aren't afraid and who are saying, yeah, we need to do something about it. Those are the true facilitators to me. That's whether it's a counseling situation, a classroom, an organizing meeting for, a revolution starting, anything. Those are the elements that are very, very important to me. I've been doing this for a long time. And over the years, I've seen a lot and I've experienced a lot. And it was a book that I actually have been writing in my head for a long time. And I used to be someone who would avoid, in entertainment, there's a lot of violence, and as I was raising my kids, I would always, this is not appropriate and so forth. And one time my son, when he was like 15 years old, he told me, but I like violence. And I thought, uh-oh, I got to start talking a little bit more about this. And this is, quite a long time ago. It's almost 10 years ago. And I had somebody else tell me the same thing. I enjoy violence. And I had to think about it. I avoided it myself. I didn't particularly like watching violence on TV or movies and things like that. And I said, oh no, it's too violent. And especially if it was gory or anything like that, sometimes it's almost unavoidable, if you're watching anything, it seems like, and it just comes on you. So I started to think seriously about what kind of impact it was personally. Like, what is it about me that is, what is invoked in me when I see those things? Why is it so uncomfortable? I thought it was just one of those, well, I don't like it because it's violence. It's sort of a circular argument, right? But it was uncomfortable. It was something about it didn't, it just, I can't say that I have been targeted for, like, violently in a way, not like so many people have who've been in war or who have, I know that there's so many situations where people have known violence even at very, very young ages. And it's something that they live with. And luckily, there are ways that people can address trauma. And I'm very familiar with that literature, and I use the literature with the group. But I needed to find out for myself how it affected me and why it was affecting me. And my avoiding it seemed to be not the answer. So then I found myself looking more at it. I wanted to then study it. I wanted to look at, why is it entertaining? What is it that is so intriguing about the ways in which violence is, and how there's, from a corporation perspective, how there's an investment in, the ways in which guns are portrayed and violence is portrayed in movies and so forth. I think there's something called good storytelling. People like good stories. And so that's what movies and TV, that's what they do, right? And every story has a tension, and the tension doesn't have to be violent, of course, but in many cases it is. We see that again and again. But the idea that we live in a society where there is the phenomenon of mass shootings like no other society in the world, that we are geared with this knowledge that this is going on and can happen, and that we have sorts of levels of mistrust of people based on those kinds of things. So on the one hand, we have this fascination with violence, and as an entertainment thing, it gives us maybe some distance, that we have some control over. And then we have a society in which, there's I think 1 out of 10 people or so own guns. It's a screwy type of reality to me. I wanted to make sense of that, and I needed to make sense of it on a personal level, how it affects people psychologically, because I'm a psychologist. I wanted to find that. And everything I kept reading about criminal behavior, violent behavior, aggression, seemed acontextualized, relatively acontextualized. And so I needed to go more into a contextualized rendering of violence. And because my area of study was already racism, I also wanted to find that out. And that's when, as I started to look even more deeply at racism, the history and the ongoing perils that it's involving beyond legislation and actions in schools and organizations and things like that, was this idea of life and death, the violence part of it. I thought of this book as sort of a swan song. This would be the culmination of things that have occurred, that I've been thinking about these things for so long and so forth. And I'm nearing retirement age, but then I found out that it was just the beginning, and that's exciting for me. I've got a lot of zeal for the topic. And if anything, I have to sit on my hands sometimes, because I will jump and I'll say, okay, I got to get involved in this particular thing or that particular thing. And then I realize, okay, I may have to wait for that because of all these other things that are going on. But I've always, like I said, been interested in grassroots activism and have created some wonderful networks throughout this city as a result, and really the country. I have colleagues in in the U.S. as well as in other places in the world, like Uganda, as I mentioned before, and also South Africa. And it is, when an idea starts up and you begin it, the one beauty of that process is the unfolding of it and the things that can be. And in just a short amount of time that this project has started, I've already seen so many things that have opened up, and interest, and then people whom I've known for so long who have done some incredible things, and I think, oh, we need that person. We need to have that person involved. Or a school that started in the city, and the whole focus is on mental health, and also on having the students travel the world. We have to have that person involved. You know, those kinds of things are going on. So I've done grassroots organizing before. In fact, almost 20 years ago I did, and that was the time that I really stuck with it for a long time. And then I moved away with the idea that the persons who were involved would carry on with it. But I had since then done smaller things, you know, here and there, and I've always been wanting to get back into it. But one of the things about this sort of activism, it's a liberation perspective, drawn from, you know, Martin Barreau, Paulo Freire, Frantz Fanon, different people all over the world. But it's about the idea that nobody can do anything. The people who are most in need really need to be at the root of everything that goes on, and whatever I can provide, resources and everything, that's what I can. That's what I do in Uganda as well. So everything takes time, and I knew that, and I knew that I needed to invest that time, carve it away, and make sure that I didn't sacrifice that kind of time that was necessary. So this ends up being a good time to really begin those kinds of things to do. And it's, again, a marriage with my works anyway, with the book and the things I've been doing for so many years.